Hello there, and welcome to Weird Music on the Glumberger channel. This is of course a show where each and every week we look at, a different kind of album and, have a little chat about them, generate a bit of discussion, So, of course, in today's episode, as you can no doubt tell, is our continuation into the excursion of the sonic assaults of Swans. And so in our last episode, we took a dive into one of the most beloved albums within the whole discography, it seems, the phenomenal Children of God. So in today's episode, we are looking at the live album counterpart to this very album. So prior to doing this video, I'll be honest, I didn't know all that much about this particular album, despite it being packaged alongside the release of Children of God that I own. I have to say though, this is a really fascinating little live document of where the band was in the year of 1987, and yeah, this has some amazing stuff in it. I'm really glad, we're diving into this one. So let's just get on with it. Today I present Feel Good Now by Swans, of course. So, in today's episode, we are of course looking at the 1988 release of Feel Good Now, a live album documenting the 1987 European tour in support of the studio album Children of God. And so, as we do in our videos on Swans, let's of course ask ourselves, who were Swans? Well, during this European tour for Feel Good Now, Swans consisted of the one and only Michael Gira, performing the lead vocals and maybe guitar? Who knows? I couldn't actually find any specific information on what the band members were playing throughout the tours, but we can have a guess, right? Probably a chance that Gira was playing a whole bunch of different things, maybe, who knows. As well as Michael, though, we also have one Theodore Ted Parsons performing the drums, no doubt. The amazing Jarbo performing keyboards, backing vocals, and even lead vocals on a few of the songs as well. Algis Kizias returns performing the bass guitar, no doubt, of course. And then how can we forget the phenomenal Norman Westberg performing the guitar again, right? I would say classic Swans lineup here. Really good lineup for Swans as well, actually. Like what this unit made was some phenomenal stuff, I feel. So, as we established in our video on Children of God, though, that album saw a sort of evolution to the band itself, starting to establish new ideas and concepts in terms of their instrumental palette. Mostly on that album, sort of being an introduction of acoustic layers and what I would argue as actual song structures. In any case, hearing the songs from Children of God in this live context, it brings with it so much more of an understanding of Swans as a band, as Feel Good Now somehow really bridges the gap between the early no-wave era of Swans with this newest sounding version of Swans, bringing the more refined structures of Children of God back towards that brutal atonal sound at times that the band was well known for, but whilst also being a step forward in a new direction as well. It's really fascinating, I feel. And as a result, this is a terrific live album, that contains easily, in my books, some of the most intense and uncomfortable live performances from the band that I've actually heard so far. I'll be honest, I didn't really know exactly what I was expecting when I sat down to properly dive into this live album, but my goodness, it really surprised me, with just how brutal and uncomfortable the whole thing is, essentially. Truly amazing stuff. So before we properly start diving into this album, I do apologise, a couple of points I want to mention first. So, Feel Good Now was originally released in '88 on vinyl, being a 2 LP set documenting the 1987 European tour, of course. And apparently, kind of like how Public Castration was sort of recorded in this weird bootleg manner, Feel Good Now was recorded during the tour on a Sony Professional Walkman. Fascinating stuff. But what I feel is important to mention though is that the specific version of Feel Good Now that we're going to be reviewing today is the 2020 remaster of the album, which was packaged alongside the remaster of Children of God, of course, which is the one I have in my collection. This is also the same version of Feel Good Now that you can find on the Swans Bandcamp as well. And so, me being the idiot that I am, I didn't realise that there was actually two different versions of this album, that they're so vastly different. So I do apologise, actually, that we're not looking at the original version of this one. I feel, though, it's important to mention, though, as because the 2020 remaster reordered a lot of the tracks, it changes the overall flow of how the album progresses, in, I would say, a sort of significant way, as well as cutting out a lot of the sort of incidental chatter and little momentary bits that are on the LP version. It also, for some reason, completely cuts out the live performance of Our Love Lies, which is a bit weird, but what can you do? Any case, I just thought I'd mention it because, in particular, the vinyl edition of this album opens up with New Mind, which sort of would certainly set the vibe in an interesting way, whereas on the 2020 remaster, the entire thing opens up with Blind Love, which is, the longest track on the whole thing, and it's a very interesting and radical change to make, I feel, as it completely changes how this overall album presents itself. Just thought I'd mention it before we begin, basically. But yeah, that's why this is going to be a bit of a weird story. The track list is going to be really weird on this one, but I do apologise. In any case, let's discuss those very tracks then, shall we? And so, Feel Good Now, it did open up with Intro, which played at the very start of this video, but considering it's just a short track of the crowd anticipating the very show, I don't feel it's all that there's much point going into it, into all its detail, basically, It's a little incidental track, basically, is what I would say. I feel like, though, in a much more truest sense, the album opens up with the incredibly intimidating Blind Love, which, at 18 minutes in length is a truly overwhelming and almost terrifying experience from Swans as a band in terms of how it sounds, as well as terrifying in how it opens up the whole album. It's essentially punctuated by this consistent drum pattern that seems like it's about to border upon a panic attack, as you get so many instrumental layers just jaggedly smashing into the scene. And it becomes an overloading bombardment of so many elements here. All just happening at once while, Jira just vocalizes, croons over the top of it all, sounding like a priest being taken over by some unholy abomination. It's a truly phenomenal opening. And at 18 minutes in length, it just becomes such a battering experience to behold. And I find this track, truly terrific and amazing in its own right, and I think it's one of the best live performances by Swans available on a live release, I feel. It just perfectly sets the mood and tone for this entire album, showcasing that there's a slightly different instrumental palette to the band, with the utilization of the acoustic guitar that's strumming away these repetitive chords over and over and over. And yet in a true Swans style, it's incredibly a violent, caustic experience to behold. I find it interesting. Just to talk about this one a bit more. Blind Love was certainly an interesting track on Children of God, but this live version of Feel Good Now just takes the entire thing to this other level, it feels. Jira is screaming with this incredible guttural roar as it becomes terrifying to listen to, as though there's this constant looming danger that you're just trying to outpace, but it's getting closer and closer. And what amazes me is how this track keeps up that momentum for the entire 18 minutes of this thing, pushed along by the drums and the jagged instrumentals. And even, when the instrumentals do sort of fade out and recede, the drums continue to push it along though, keeping that rhythm and that momentum going and leading it towards that terrifying destination. I think it's a truly phenomenal performance, and it reveals new and exciting details each and every time you listen to this one. No, whether it be the particular of Jarbo's keyboards, or a roll upon the drums, or even how the acoustic guitar is sounding, with Jira just pounding away on those repetitive strums. Or even the particulars of just Jira's vocal performance, the screaming, the howling. It's phenomenal. It all just culminates in this truly amazing experience that is genuinely overwhelming to approach. But I think it's so incredibly exciting in its own right. And my goodness, what a way to start off this live album, I feel, It's, yes, vastly different from how it was originally released, in 88, where, this track was actually towards the end of it, but opening with it, I think that is really interesting. Phenomenal stuff. But let's talk about the rest of the album, shall we? Following on from this 18-minute onslaught, we get another brutal sonic assault of Like a Drug, Sha-La-La-La. And so viewers of our episode on Children of God might remember that this is one of those rather popular Swans songs that I don't rate all that much, and I think on this particular version, it's a little bit better, I would say. The instrumentals themselves are so much more brutal sounding, so much more caustic within the chaotic mix, which, I think, helps present this very intimidating experience that feels like it's trying to break you apart, essentially. And what I find, very impressive is the incredible control that Jira has over his own voice, pushing it, forward through phenomenally amazing places, just creating this overbearing experience that's so intimidating. And weirdly enough, when it gets to the part that I don't like all that much, the Sha-La-La part, I find it a bit more interesting to hear on this particular version, I'm not sure why. I think because it might be this version feels a little bit more caustic and brutal than its album counterpart, which makes it a bit more interesting to me for some reason. But yeah, it's a bit of an interesting one. I think it's a really good highlight on this album, and it just continues that battering after the brutal opener we had. And so yeah, following on from this, we get a live rendition of Blood and Honey, which I know is one of my favourites from Children of God, actually, and I think a bit of an underrated track from the whole album. And on this live version, it comes as a sort of welcome moment of respite after that opening, as it sort of slows down the whole tempo to this really ominous crawl, with the very drum beats being punctuated by the heavy descent of these piano notes, offset by the wonderful sounding drones that rumble with this amazing presence. And it's also so delightful and lovely to hear Jarbo taking the lead vocals on this one, though. Her voice just has this amazing presence and character to it, I feel, singing in these incredibly dark lower registers that sound so foreboding and intimidating. And I really love it when this entire song opens up in the, I guess you call it the chorus section, but that section, I guess, maybe. The instruments just become louder and chuggier, with just so much more pummel in their presence on the recording itself, as though we're suddenly witness to something so sinister and horrifying, And I think, again, as mentioned, much like the album counterpart, another favourite of mine, I just love the slow, smouldering atmosphere that the whole track is presenting, especially in how Jarbo performs this entire thing, sounding like a spectral ghost rising from the green stagnant waters. Brilliant stuff. From here, we get the next track of New Mind, which of course opened up the original 1988 release, of course. And this is an interesting one. On the studio album, of course, was the New Mind was the album's opener, having this wonderful showcasing of the direction the band was heading in, with the expanded musical palette, the domination of the acoustic guitar outfit. Here, it feels like the entire composition is presenting itself, much in the same way that the album version does, but there's also this kind of nastier, sinister edge to the entire thing. Where the album version felt like a preacher delivering a sermon to their many followers, it feels like now, in this context, nobody's following them, and they're just preaching towards the sky itself in a desperate attempt to feel glory at whatever god it is they are following, And it becomes a bit of a different experience, but I like the more sinister edge that this has, in comparison to the album version, of course. Whether it's better, I don't know. Of course, these things are up to everybody's opinion, of course, and personally, I'd probably would prefer the album version, but I like this live version for a lot of reasons, you know? It's just weirdly uglier sounding and so much more brutal, so much more unforgiving, which I think makes it a really fascinating experience. So from here, we get onto the album's second longest track, Sex, God, Sex, clocking in at roughly 10 minutes on this one. And so this one, of course, opens up with its incredibly peculiar scraping of percussive elements, I think, and what I assume is the keyboards playing very unusual tones, you know. And I think it's a fantastic opener to the track itself, you know. You get this real sense of confusion and fear as you just, you know, wonder what horror is going to reveal itself to you. And that is until you get the cataclysmic smashing of the drums before the proceedings begin, and you get that wonderful slide of the guitar, you know, that makes the song so satisfying and so weird as well. And I love the slow tempo of this one, though. It just crawls so brilliantly as Jira howls and screams with such amazing presence in his voice, I have to say. Weirdly enough, I'm not 100% sure, I'm pretty sure about this, but I think this version is actually proceeding a little bit slower than the album version, which is great for me, because I love it when everything is sort of slowed down and expanded outwards more, you know? And of course, in this one, I also love it when the song opens up towards the middle half with Jarbo vocalizing so brilliantly over those monolithic instrumentals. It just becomes such an immense and intimidating force as the band pummel you to pieces with their performance. And there's no respite, no rest here. It's just one of the, I think it's, you know, just, you're just getting constant intimidation as you're continually screamed and shouted at by Michael here. You know, it's terrifying, but it's fascinating as well. And I would say, I think another one of the best performances on this live disc. There's something about it that makes it so incredible and immense. From here though, we get the next track of Beautiful Child, which is, if we remember from our video on Children of God, is an incredibly intense, bleak and rather disturbing track. And opening this one up, you know, you're getting the cataclysmic ringing and smashing of percussion. It could be like the early shows where they, you know, just bang large pieces of metal maybe, I'm not sure, who knows. But in any case, it creates this really uncomfortable, disturbing opener, and it just overloads you before moving into this incredibly frantic part where all the instrumentals come in with this atonal discordance. And it's a very overwhelming opener it has, you know, but it leads the way perfectly for that song's cut into, you know, Michael's lead performance, you know, where the entire thing slows down to that quintessential Swans crawl, the boom, boom kind of thing. And, you know, his vocal delivery on this one, really intense and amazing, I feel, but what I love is the way the bass guitar in the background is just bouncing back and forth between those two notes in a way that is so reminiscent of that early no-wave era. And the result of everything, from the band playing this incredibly intimidating and ferocious way that, you know, Gira's absurdly intense vocal performance was, you know, it just results in one of the most uncomfortable experiences on this, you know, already uncomfortable, terrifying album, right? I think it's phenomenal, though, and somehow comes across as even more brutal than the album's counterpart. That consistent swing of the rhythm section to the onslaught of atonal guitar performances, it's another highlight on this album that, you know, it demonstrates, this newer style of Swans, you know, even whilst that brutality that they're so well known for still remains such a part of the very live performance itself. And if anything, like, maybe this is controversial of me to say so, but my opinion, of course, but I feel as though the band are coming across a lot more strongly than they did on the previous live album we looked at of Public Castration. You know, on that album, there is a brilliance to the really bleak, sludgy, atonal, you know, just dirge the whole thing is. It's just so slow, it crawls along, and it's so just, But on this one, we're getting that sort of brutality again. But everything's so much more refined in a way. Everyone's just really, like, you know, doing a lot more with the very notions, I feel. And it's all very much improved, but it's still as bleak and uncomfortable as ever, I feel. do you even go from here, I feel? To be fair, the album moves on to the live rendition of Blackmail, which I think, after the agonising and brutal onslaughts of the previous track, is so much needed at this point on the album. And I've said it before, I'll say it again, but I really like Blackmail. I think, as mentioned, much needed moment of respite after being bombarded on this album so far. And it does this, it has the same purpose on the album, on the Children of God album as well, I feel. But which is, you kind of need to just have a bit of moment to just go, Anyway, this version, there's just this incredibly beautiful and lovely resonance to the piano that just expands out and just fills up the entire room with these incredibly dense and heavy chords as Jarbo sings so brilliantly and so beautifully over it all. And I have to say, I really like the level of contrast that this kind of song brings to the whole Swans repertoire. The intense, heavy brutality of the other tracks is incredible and something to really behold, I feel, but contrasting it with this other side of Swans, that is still heavy in its own weird way, it makes the whole project so much more interesting in my eyes, and it helps create this entire flow to the album that makes it a little bit easier to digest, I feel. To me, it's like we've just been brutally beaten and dragged violently through the mud towards the river, and here is where, essentially you're drowning beneath the very waves themselves, but there's a kind of, acceptance of the grim nature of the situation, and you just have to let the entire thing happen. I mean, it's what comes across to me for some reason, but hopefully that makes a bit of sense to you. From here, we get a live rendition of Trust Me, which on this album, this version, is so much more of a brutal, pummeling version of the album's counterpart, of course. And this one's a very interesting performance, no doubt, with Michael's performance coming across as this sort of anguished act of desperation. And I find it's interesting how starkly different this one is to the Children of God version, which that one came across as so much more of a laid-back and somber affair. But this one seems to drag that track back towards the brutal Swans dirge that we're no doubt so used to by now. And I would argue it makes it a little bit more interesting in some ways, but I don't know. I'm not sure if I rate this particular track on the album all that much. The ending is definitely interesting when Michael just howls out this vocalization over the instrumentals, backed up by Jarbo's oohs and ahs, which I think creates this lovely and intense soundscape. But I feel like the build-up to this point on the album has taken a long while, and after the incredibly heavy and brutal offerings of the previous tracks have created on this album, I don't know why, but I feel like this one falls a little bit short for some reason. I don't know, there's something about it didn't click with me for some reason, so if this is one that you feel differently about, then by all means let me know in the comments, because we should all get different opinions on these things, when and where available kind of thing. Let's move along. We get to the title track of the studio album, Children of God. And this one plays out very much like its album counterpart, with a lot of the elements coming forward on this live version in so much more of an angular and intense way. In the background, you've got Norman's fuzzy electric guitar intensely playing that same lick over and over and over as Jarbo so beautifully sings the song over, the vocals over the entire thing. And what amazes me on this one, though, is, Jira's backing vocals in the song that come across so intensely and viscerally, bringing with it so much more of a nastier and harsher edge to the entire song, I feel. His performance makes this one feel so much more intense and brutal than one would expect, and as a result, I really like this one, to be fair. This was easily one of my favourites off of the studio album. I really love the atmosphere and the vibe it presents. And then on this one, you're just getting this so much more intense version that I think improves upon the already brilliant elements of the original version. On here, it's longer, darker and harsher in places, coming across as this overloading and intense experience of being preached to by this incredibly dark, disturbing pastor who you just don't trust, right? But what I love is how everyone's come together on the performance of this one, just perfectly presenting the incredibly ominous atmosphere that permeates throughout so many of these songs. And on this one, it's dark and harrowing, but it's also, ascending. It's reaching up towards the very skies themselves, I think easily a brilliant one on this album. And so we're getting to the end. So to close off pretty much, we get a next track of Beautiful Child, the Town and Country Reprise Backstab, which is a 2.5-minute reprise of Beautiful Child, bringing us right back to that incredibly intense atonal swing as Michael, of course, howls and screams over the entire thing. What I think is amazing is how indiscernible the vocals are on this one, and it's interesting because the instrumentals do that pummeling drive that of course, bringing this right to the end, but then it all just stops, letting all those instruments whine out with intense feedback as Michael continues to scream so intensely, his vocals filling up that entire room with his uncomfortable terrain. I think, to be fair, it creates this wonderful moment on the album where we've built up to this singular point where Gira has become this unholy preacher delivering his terrifying sermon to us, the unsuspecting audience, ending it all with the repeated refrain of kill, kill, kill. Terrifying, but amazing, I feel. And then it's pretty much over. We do get a final track of Thank You, Goodbye, where, Michael talks to the audience in a rather amusing little conversation, Now, to be fair to fans of Swans, they seem to be obsessed with thank you messages from Michael Gira, as evidenced by the release of Thank You combined with special editions of The Beggar. In any case, ending the album with this one, it creates a nice little moment following on from the very brutal performance we've had up to this point, it seems that Michael's recommending that certain members of the audience go and get a refund, which is kind of funny after what we've all just experienced, But it's a nice little moment of sort of brevity and calm, after the essentially the assault of this live album, and they're kind of cool to end it on there, just sort of to fade out the scene, if that makes sense. And essentially, we've covered all of Feel Good Now by Swans, and I have to say, this is a very interesting live album, and it's one that pleasantly surprised me. And as I mentioned in the video for Public Castration, I'm not all too familiar with the live albums in Swans, so I'm finding it incredibly interesting discovering them all for the first time as part of this little series we're doing for Weird Music, essentially. And I think Feel Good Now, easily a fascinating little document into the Children of God tour, showcasing that there's still this incredibly brutal and harsh vibe to the music Swans performs, but especially with these songs, it all just feels so much more refined and assured of itself, And it's a wonderful progression from the brutal atonal early years into this newer era of Swans, but all the while still showcasing that they haven't lost their edge as an uncomfortable, loud band. They still have that brutality, that atonalness at times, but now there's so much more happening with it, I feel. And I have to say, there's some truly phenomenal performances on this live album that I think, at times come across a lot better than their studio album counterparts, But it might be a thing, though, where it shines more in contrast with its album counterparts. By knowing how the album sounds and hearing the live versions and making those comparisons, it makes it stronger, if that makes sense. Whereas maybe if it was just in context of itself, it wouldn't stand out as much. But who knows, of course. And to be fair, it's not a case of the album versions being bad, but it's just that these brutal performances here are just so amazing in their own right that it brings so much more of a nastier and uncomfortable edge to these already rather nasty, uncomfortable songs. Truly amazing, and I'm really glad to finally taken the time to get into it all. And so with that, we're coming to the end of our episode of Weird Music. I have to say, I'm really enjoying discovering the live iterations, of all my favourite Swans albums, essentially, and it just showcases the amazing talent of this incredible lineup of musicians, I feel, always offering this incredibly dense, heavy slab of intense music, And I'll be honest, I don't know how well Feel Good Now ranks or will rank, amongst all of the live albums by Swans. Especially as we have so many more to discover, and I'll be honest, I don't even know if I rank it more or less than Public Castration, to be fair. Really weird, like, I genuinely don't think I can make that decision. But in any case, I think it's a fascinating document of where the band was at this point in time, as well as having phenomenal versions of the songs they were playing in that era, you know? Especially on this one, you know, tracks like Blind Love, Sex God Sex, and Children of God, they just pummel and batter with this intense, overwhelming presence, which are then offset by the incredibly grim, melancholy nature of songs like Blood and Honey and Blackmail, of course. A wonderful live document, I feel, and really glad to have checked this one out for all of you. And so, in our next episode of Swans, we'll be going back to the studio albums and discussing what I would say is probably going to be one of the band's weirdest albums in context of the band itself, you know, the band's first and only major record release of The Burning World. And I'll be honest, I have heard this one before, but I really struggle with this one. I don't know why, but I just struggle to get into this album, so I will try my best to, you know, discuss this one and really get into it, so more on that another day, yeah. But now though, I would like to thank you for watching today's episode of Weird Music. I wish you all the best, take care, and bye bye for now. Bye bye!